So let's talk about the third angle theorem. So the third angle theorem says if two angles of one triangle are congruent to two angles of another triangle, then the third angles of the respective triangles must be congruent. Okay, so in this case, if we look at the diagram down here, if angle A is congruent to angle D and angle B is congruent to angle E, then the theorem states that, okay, well, that means C must be congruent to F. All right, and hopefully that's somewhat intuitive, but we're about to prove it. So here's an example where we're given that in two triangles that angle A is congruent to angle D, right? And angle B is congruent to angle E. So we're given that two angles are congruent, and we're trying to prove that, okay, well, that should mean that the third angles of each triangle are congruent. Okay, so we'll start with the givens. So angle A is congruent to angle D, and angle B is congruent to angle E. And that's already shown in our diagram in terms of the arcs there, so we don't have to add that. But our reason is given. All right, so what can we say with that? So now I want to convert to measures because I'm going to end up talking about the triangle sum theorem, right? That says that the sum of the angles of a triangle are 180. So I'm talking about measures. So I want to break these down to their measures. So I'm going to say measure of angle A is equal to the measure of angle D. And the reason is definition of congruent angles. So if angles are congruent, their measures are the same. Of congruent angles, right? And this, for the same reason, I'm going to say measure of angle B is equal to the measure of angle E. All right. So now I'm going to use the triangle sum theorem. So I'm going to say measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B plus the measure of angle C is equal to 180. Okay. And that's because of the triangle angle sum theorem. Angle sum theorem. Okay. And then I'm going to say the same thing about the other triangle. So measure of angle D plus the measure of angle E plus the measure of angle F equals 180. Okay. All right. Could have done a better job with my spacing there. So part 4, or step 4. So now that I know that those are congruent, or now that I know that, now that those are both equal to 180, I can set them equal to one another, right, by the transitive property or substitution property. So the book uses substitution. I'm going to use transitive property. Okay, so I'm going to say measure of angle A plus measure of angle B plus measure of angle C is equal to measure of angle D plus the measure of angle E plus the measure of angle F. All right, so what do you think we can do now? So remember, we're trying to prove that C is congruent to F. So we know that measure of angle A equals measure of angle D, right? So by using the substitution property, I can plug in D for A, right? And we know that the measure of angle B is equal to the measure of angle E. So instead of angle B, I can put in angle E, right? So by using substitution, I can say measure of angle D plus the measure of angle E plus the measure of angle C equals the measure of angle D plus the measure of angle E plus the measure of angle F, right? And I can do that with substitution property of equality. All right. And now that we're here, now we can actually, sorry, I lost my image there. So, so anyway, we have the writing here at the bottom. So now we can say that, now we can subtract D from both sides, right? And we can subtract E from both sides, right? So if we, by using our subtraction property, we can say, okay, well, the D's cancel out and the E's cancel out if we subtract them from both sides. And so we're just left with measure of angle C equals the measure of angle F, right? And so we use the subtraction property of equality. And so finally, now that we know that their measures are equal, we can say that angle C is congruent to angle F because of definition of congruent angles, right? Congruent angles. All right, so there's our proof. So we just proved that if two triangles have two angles that are congruent, then their third angles must also be congruent.